Did Joe Biden deliver on his promises made during the 2020 campaign? Let's get into it. The first promise he made was to beat COVID. Now, obviously, it's a very vague goal because what does it exactly mean to beat COVID? He's going to say he beat it. Republicans are going to say he didn't beat it. Look, I'm going to give him 25% credit for this. I graded these out of 1. I'm going to give him 0.25. There were more deaths under Biden than there were Trump, COVID-related. It's tough because you could make the argument that if somebody that was less hawkish, that was less aggressive attacking COVID in terms of the mask and the mandates, all that stuff, you definitely could make the argument that someone else at president, potentially Trump for another term, that would have been worse for COVID. There would have been even more deaths. That's surely possible. I don't necessarily disagree with that. You could make the opposite argument that the shutdowns, and a lot of them were at the state level, they weren't federalized, but the encouragement of shutdowns, the encouragement of mandates and stuff like that were too far. So maybe you viewed beating COVID as doing nothing and just kind of returning to normal life. I'm going to give him 0.25 credit. Look, it could have been worse for sure in either direction. There could have been more hawkishness, more lockdowns, etc. And there also could have been more deaths. I think he played kind of a safe middle ground, and it was okay. I don't think it was great. I think it could have been handled better, but nonetheless. Now, his second promise was to rebuild the economy. And look, maybe a hot take, I think he did an okay job at that. Look, we were the first country, the United States was the first country to get below a 4% inflation rate. A lot of people are going to point to inflation and say that that was why Joe Biden's term was a failure. And inevitably, it was a failure to some degree because Trump got back in, and that was his main reason for running. He's going to be one-term president and usher in a new era of Democrats and defeat Trump. Now, he did defeat Trump in 2020, but that inflation, as well as some border issues, depending on which one you think is more important, but I'm going to say it's inflation. Although the inflation, in my opinion, wasn't his fault, I think it was global inflation. When you shut the country down, when you pay people, when you put everybody on unemployment, look, there's going to be inflation, and the inflation happened under him. So it might not be your fault, but it's your bleep. So inevitably, I honestly think he did an okay job. As I mentioned, first country under 4% inflation. Our unemployment was among the lowest in the world. So I think it was all right. There was a lot of inflation, no doubt. Unemployment was high, but I think when you're going to say we had a bad economy under Biden and a bad recovery from COVID, you have to compare it to somebody. And there weren't many countries that came out of the COVID-19, semi-depression a lot better than the United States. So I think he did an okay job. A lot of people disagree with that. A lot of people give him 0% credit. I'm giving him 50% credit for that one. Now, the next one was end gun violence, and I'm going to give him a 0%. I'm going to give him his full 0 out of 1. I'm not even going to give him 0.25. I'm not going to give him 0.5. I'm not going to give him anything. Look, he passed 0 major gun control legislation. There was nothing. The NRA actually loved this dude. They were probably secretly giving him money. They're like, yeah, Joe, we love you. We love you. Ironically enough, Donald Trump banned bump stocks in high-capacity magazines in 2017. Donald Trump passed more anti-gun legislation than Biden did. So, look, I think first thing is these claims that these politicians make end gun violence, what does that mean? Does that mean to decrease it? Does that mean when you say end, do you genuinely mean 0? Because if that's the claim, then you could never reach that bar, at least in my opinion. So, yeah, I'm going 0 out of 1. I mean, there was... gun violence increased. It continues to increase. And I don't really think he even, it'd be one thing if he passed a lot of legislation and it just didn't work. There was no legislation that was passed. So he did nothing in that direction. Next one is going to be restore foreign relations. Now, this is a complex one because I gave him a score of 0.5 or 1 out of 1. So I think there are arguments that could be made that he gets 50% credit for restoring foreign relations, or you could make the argument that I think he gets full credit for restoring foreign relations. Now, what I mean by that is this was coming off the first term of Trump, and Trump was not as friendly with Ukraine. Trump was not as friendly with some of our allies, with the tariff battles. We've seen that ramp up in the second term, but this was before the second term. So there was some rockiness with our quote-unquote allies in NATO. You could debate how serious was it. Nonetheless, I would say that our relations with NATO countries, I would say definitely, and Republicans admit to this, that Joe Biden was very friendly with NATO countries, very helpful with Ukraine. So I guess you give him credit for that. They like the Democrats more, those NATO countries in Europe. Now, the reason why I don't give him full credit, the reason why I'm leaning towards 50% versus 1% or 100% is my opinion on this, and people could definitely disagree with this, but I would say that part of restoring foreign relations means you're also meeting with Putin. That means you're also meeting with the bad guys. I think it's easy to meet with people who are friendly with us, people who are our allies. I don't view it. People viewed a Trump meeting with Kim Jong-un and Trump being kind of buddy-buddy with other dictators as a bad thing. Honestly, look, I think you got to negotiate with bad people. That's just kind of the name of the game. If those bad people are going to exist, I want to be on good terms with them. And I don't think Biden did much negotiating with bad people. I think it was more of a, we can't even normalize talking to you. So, it really depends. Obviously, when he said that, he meant NATO countries. When I hear restore foreign relations, I think that means with the entire world. I think that means the entire world is on good footing with you. So, it's tough to really pick a side on that. I'm probably leaning towards 50% though. And the last promise that he made was to protect abortion. And that's 0 out of 1. Look, there was nothing that happened under, abortion rights got restricted under Biden, and got turned back to the states. So, look, he didn't do anything to protect abortion. Now, you might like that. You might be more pro-life, and that might be a good thing for you, but I'm speaking specifically from his campaign promises. He said he'd protect abortion. He didn't protect abortion. And there really isn't much to discuss on that front. Another promise he made, and I kind of have to include this. I didn't include it as his 5 major promises. But his one of his major promises, probably his 6th most important promise, was to defeat Trump. And I'm not going to include this in my final grade, but he sort of did, but inevitably didn't. Because obviously he literally defeated him in 2020. But kind of that defeating of Trump in 2020 was supposed to mean that Trump didn't take power again. And Trump did take power because of Biden's either incompetence or, if you think he did a good job, lack of marketing. So inevitably he ended up losing to Trump. Not literally, but you get the point. Now, my final grade of Joseph Biden in terms of his campaign promises, not my personal grade, because I'm not even saying if I support or don't support these promises. I'm giving him a 1.25 or 1.75, obviously with the foreign relations being the kind of swing 50% on that topic. So I'm giving him a 25 to 35% out of 100. If you watched the last video I did on Trump, Trump fulfilled 30% of his campaign promises. Biden fulfilled 25 to 35%. So I fail both of them. When you don't deliver on your campaign promises or get close, I think that's a failure.